Hi everyone. We're going to move on and take a look at section 8 of chapter 17, and this is taking a look at a new endocrine gland, which is going to be the thyroid gland. So we're going to be taking a look at the anatomy first, and then we're going to be taking a look at how the thyroid hormones are going to be produced, and then we'll talk about, of course, the effects of thyroid hormone. Take a look at some clinical disorders that are associated with thyroid hormones, and then we'll take a look at another hormone that's secreted from the thyroid gland. All right, so first let's take a look at the anatomy of the thyroid gland. So one of the things that you do is you look for your larynx, and you just kind of move down, and there's your thyroid gland. So you have this kind of, we'll talk a little bit later in the respiratory system, and we'll talk about the larynx and the thyroid cartilage. But basically, you kind of look for your Adam's apple and then move a little bit down from there. Hopefully you don't feel too much, because if you feel lumps and bumps, then that might be a little bit of a problem. But that's what the doctors are for, right? Is for to go in and find those little lumps and bumps. Hopefully there's nothing there. There's two lobes, and they're connected right there in the middle, highly vascularized, which you'll find most of, pretty much all of the endocrine glands are going to be highly vascularized. If you think about it, why are they highly vascularized? Well, hormones are going to use the bloodstream to move around to get to where they need to go. So there needs to be a nice network of these capillaries surrounding all of your endocrine glands so hormones can get there and use the bloodstream to move around. So now let's take a look at where the thyroid hormones, we'll take a look at two of the thyroid hormones where they are produced, and then we'll take a look at where the other thyroid hormone is going to be produced. So this is something that you guys will be looking at APR in the lab. It's going to be this little microscope site, maybe not the same exact one, but it's going to be taking a look, we're going to be looking at that histology. So let's first take a look at something called the thyroid follicle. Thyroid follicles are going to be composed of two main structures. Thyroid follicles are going to be made up of these follicular cells right here. So right here, here's follicular cells. They're basically those simple cuboidal cells that you are looking at right there. And right in the middle of all of them is going to be the colloid. So all of this right in here is going to be the colloid. It's a viscous fluid, so it's not going to be a solid right in there. It's going to be a nice viscous fluid, and it's going to be protein rich, because we're going to be talking about how the thyroid hormone is going to be made here in a little bit. On the outside of these follicular cells, you are going to have something called parafollicular cells. So in this picture, it's the little blue ones that you see. Para, of course, that's going to kind of give you the connotation that's going to be right next to or kind of surrounding on the outside of those follicular cells. So let's take a look at how two of these hormones are going to be made. T3 and T4 are going to be made here in the follicular cells, the thyroid follicle. But it uses a combination of the follicular cells and the colloid in order to make it. So you have T3 and T4. T3 is triiodothyronine. T4 is usually known as thyroxine, but you have another connotation right there, tetraiodothyronine. And really what they're telling you is, of course, one of them is going to have three iodines, one of them is going to have 4 iodines. That's basically it. So the first thing we have to do is we have to get iodine into this thyroid follicle. And this is going to be basically dietary iodine. Think about where you get iodine in your diet. You're going to get it from iodinized salt, and you're also going to get it from seafood, shellfish, things like that. So it is going to be transported across the membrane. It's going to move across the follicular cells. Remember, those are those simple cuboidal cells that we looked at. And then it's going to be moved into the colloid. So another thing that's happening in the follicular cells is this is where these things called thyroglobulins are going to be made, which thyroglobulins are these big protein molecules. Once they're made, they're going to be sent into the colloid as well. And in the next slide, we're just going to take a look at how the thyroglobulin and the iodine is just going to be put together. That's basically it. Once they're put together here in the colloid, they are going to move through the follicular cell. Don't worry about all these little specifics about, you know, the lysosome is going to join to it, and it's going to allow for the T3 and T4 to be placed into the bloodstream. Don't worry about all those little tiny details there. So that's basically it, how they are going to be made. Let's take a little bit closer at how T3 and T4 are going to be made. Again, don't worry about the small little details. It just kind of shows you, here's that thyroglobulin that we are going to have. Here are the iodines. And basically what happens is you have this enzyme that is going to help add those iodine molecules to that thyroglobulin. And again, this is looking at T4 because it has 1, 2, 3, 4 iodine molecules. If it was T3, then it would only have T3 3 iodine molecules. So this is showing what's happening in the colloid mixture, how iodine and thyroglobulin are going to meet in the colloid, and they're going to get together and join that way, and then they're going to move back into the follicular cells. So now that we know that T3 and T4 are made, let's take a look at the functions. So T3 is going to be the most active form of the thyroid hormone, but interestingly enough, T4 is going to be made in a greater amount. About 90% of the hormones, the thyroid hormones, made is going to be T4. The other 10% is only T3. But you're thinking, well, T3 is the most active form. What's going on? Actually, most of your cells have this enzyme that can go in and cut one of the iodines off of T4, and then you magically have T3, right? Because that's the main difference between the two. So let's take a look and see what happens. Remember, this thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, are going to be controlled by that hypothalamus, anterior pituitary little axis that we have. So you have the hypothalamus that is going to produce TRH. So you might be thinking, well, what even causes the hypothalamus to secrete that hormone? Usually what it's going in and it's constantly monitoring the level of T3 and T4 in the blood. So whenever T3 and T4 in the blood decrease, you have this little feedback loop that goes back and says, hey, we need more hormones, thyroid hormones, and that tells the hypothalamus to go ahead and get this whole thing started. Other things that can go in and kick it in are pregnancy, cold weather. We'll talk about it a little bit, why cold weather here in a second. High altitude hypoglycemia as well. We'll talk about that too. So that's going to be released. TRH is going to be released. It tells the anterior pituitary to secrete TSH, and that is going to go in and communicate with the thyroid gland to secrete its T3 and T4. Remember, these are lipid-soluble molecules. Even though they're an amino acid-based molecule, or hormone, I guess I should say, same thing. But they are going to, not exactly the same thing, but I think you guys get my drift. Anyway, I digress again. So they are a lipid-soluble hormone. That means that they have to be bound to one of those carrier proteins, transport proteins, to be moved around in the bloodstream. So they are going to be moved around in the bloodstream that way. Once they find their target cells, they're going to be released. Let's take a look at their target cells and exactly what they do. So really, if you think about the main function of the thyroid hormone, it's going to go in and regulate metabolism or metabolic rate. So if you think about metabolism, and it's basically going in and kind of causing your cells to increase cellular respiration. Think about cellular respiration. Think about the fuel, or actually the two reactants that you need for cellular respiration to occur. You need glucose and you need oxygen. So let's first take a look and see how we're going to get glucose into the bloodstream. So one thing that we can do is we can go to our glucose storage center, which is glycogen in the liver. So this is what's happening right here. Glycogenolysis. That is going to be where we break down glycogen. So if we break down glycogen, we are just going in and putting a bunch of glucose molecules into the bloodstream that way. Another thing that we are going to do, and it also talks about how there's a decrease in glycogenesis which is a formation of glycogen. Since we want to break down glycogen, the last thing we want to do is to make glycogen. So that's the reason why. Let's take a look at how we can get some other kind of fuel into the bloodstream. Because remember, with cellular respiration, glucose is great. Actually, glucose is preferred, especially by neurons. But a lot of other cells can use other things besides glucose. Hopefully you remember that from 1406 or from 2401, how they can use glycerol, fatty acids, to go in, and we can feed that into different parts of cellular respiration, into the Krebs cycle and things like that. So take a look at this. We are going to go in and increase lipolysis. We're going to break down lipids so we can throw in some glycerol and fatty acids as well. So that's some other kind of fuel that we can give for cellular respiration. So once we are able to go in and get glucose, some other fuel, remember the other thing that we need for cell respiration to occur is oxygen. So how do we get more oxygen? Well, we increase our breathing rate. That's how we get it into the body. Let's talk about how we are going to get it to the other cells. We are going to increase the heart rate. So that's what's going to happen for aerobic cellular respiration to occur. So once that happens, we're going to get that stuff to all of the cells in the body, especially neurons. The book talks a little bit more about neurons and specifically what's happening with like the sodium and the potassium pumps, which is interesting. So if you want to read it, you can, but you don't have to necessarily know the little specifics on what's going on there, because we're mainly looking at this net effect that's going on. So once we can get glucose and oxygen to the cells, that increases metabolic rate, which remember is going to increase how much oxygen we use, how much glucose we use, and things like that. And always heat is going to be increased as well. Anytime that we have more cellular respiration going on in the body, heat, energy in the form of heat is also produced. So it is going to go in and increase our heat as well. There's the increased metabolic rate. We also, of course, increase that glucose uptake. All of those cells are going in and increasing that glucose uptake. So that's why cold weather can go in and stimulate the release of thyroid hormone, because of that increased heat. What it's going in is trying to generate a little bit more heat to be produced to help with that homeostasis there. As far as hypoglycemia, this is the reason why hypoglycemia can trigger T3 and T4 to be made. So that's basically all the effects in word form instead of our picture form that we just looked at there. Another thing I want to point out is how important thyroid hormone is for a lot of different functions in the body, not just metabolism, but thyroid hormones are actually required for normal growth and development. It's required for reproductive physiology. So if for some reason an individual does not have enough thyroid hormone, then their skeletal system might not grow correctly, their nervous system might not grow correctly, there might be some reproductive issues later on in life or at that point in their life. So that's why thyroid hormone is so important, not just for regulating metabolism, but also for other necessary growth and development, especially for fetal development as well. Let's take a look at some of the clinical disorders that might come about if we are not producing enough thyroid hormone, if we're producing too much thyroid hormone. So this is looking at hypersecretion or hyposecretion of the thyroid hormone. This specifically is looking at hyperthyroidism, where you have an excess production of T3, T4. So obviously, if you have more of T3, T4, that means you have more effects that are happening. So you have more metabolic rate, which, I mean, if you increase cellular respiration, that means that they're going in and using all of that glucose, they're using all of those, the fuel from the fat cell. If they don't have enough, then those fat cells are going to break down even more to put more fuel into the body. If there's not enough, then it will go to the muscles to help break down as well. Because remember, we can use amino acids and put them into different parts of cellular respiration. So it might do that as well. So weight loss could occur, hyperactivity, heat intolerance, so they might run a little hot because of all of this cell respiration that's going on. And this could be by T4 ingestion, maybe something's going on with the pituitary gland, too much TSH is being secreted, that's going in and telling the body to secrete more T3 and T4. Or there could be a problem with feedback control to the thyroid gland, and this is specifically what happens with Graves' disease, and they're showing a little bit of some of the signs and symptoms of Graves' disease down there. Usually what happens is the thyroid's removed if this is the case. It really depends on how severe the problem is with the hyperthyroidism. Sometimes it can be controlled by medications. So that's just one treatment. There's other treatments that can be available. Let's take a look at hypothyroidism. This is going to be where your body's not producing enough thyroid hormone. So everything is going to be the opposite of what we just looked at. Low metabolic rate. This could lead to weight gain because of that, because your body's not going in and breaking down the fat stores, or it's not using the glucose like it needs to. The glucose can be turned into fat after that. Extreme lethargy, cold intolerance. Again, you're not producing there's not a lot of heat being produced because there's not a whole lot of cell respiration occurring. And photophobia as well. It's also interesting. Hypothyroidism can be because you're not taking in enough iodine. I mean, if you think about why hypothyroidism occurs, look at that, decreased production of thyroid hormone. If you don't have iodine in the bloodstream, then that means no or not enough thyroid hormone is going to be produced if you don't have enough iodine intake. Also, again, problems with the the pituitary gland can cause problems. Sometimes removing the thyroid because of issues post-surgical can cause problems. Or there's autoimmune disorders that can cause it. Hashimoto's disease or Hashimoto's thyroiditis can occur, and that's going to be where the immune system's going in and destroying the thyroid gland. So usually it's treated by some kind of hormone replacement. So goiter is going to be specifically what happens when when there is not enough dietary iodine in the diet. Goiter is going to be where usually the thyroid gland is overworking to try somehow to produce thyroid hormones, but it can't produce it because there's not enough iodine, but it's still really trying hard. And so it gets kind of swollen because of this overworking that's happening right there in the thyroid gland. So this is showing a goiter. People can have goiters and not even know it, where it's just kind of a little bit of enlargement, and that's what the doctor's going in and feeling for. But this is going to be kind of a little bit more of an extreme that's happening. Usually if you put iodine into your diet, add in some salt or eat some fish or shellfish or something like that, then that is going to help take care of that problem. This doesn't happen a whole lot in countries that actually have iodinized salt. So this can happen where people don't have access to iodinized salt, or they don't have access to seafood or anything like that. Let's take a look at the last hormone that a lot of people forget that's made in the thyroid gland. So many people just think thyroid gland, metabolism, but you've got to remember that the thyroid gland also is going to be key in helping regulate calcium as well. So calcitonin is going to be secreted from the thyroid. Remember from those little parafollicular cells that I showed you earlier? The main thing that it does, this thing that stimulates it to be released, is when blood calcium levels are too high. So calcitonin is going to be secreted, and it's going to go in to decrease blood calcium levels. It does it a couple of different ways. It can go in and just tell osteoclasts to calm down, so it inhibits osteoclast activity, but it can also go in and stimulate kidneys to help with excretion that way, so we can get rid of more calcium in the urine that way. So there's a couple of different ways that it's going to do, but just make sure you remember calcitonin, and it helps decrease blood calcium levels. In the next section, we're going to take a look at the antagonist to this hormone and how it works to go in and help regulate blood calcium levels the opposite way. So until next time.